Hello, hello, Internet.
Hi,
Happy
everybody.
Monday. Yeah, happy Monday. Good morning. Well, I don't know if it's morning anywhere else. Super early morning, maybe in parts of Asia Pacific. But good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Thank you for hopping in here with us. I'm just trying to see if the stream updates. Yeah, I think we are live. Yeah, we are live on the internet. So I'm your host, Sam Basu. This is welcome to Code It Live. This is actually a special stream, which is for a user group that we used to have in person. But hey, at least we get to hang out virtually on the internet, right? So this is for the Columbus App Dev user group. If you are here to see us do the regular coding streams, this is not one of them. In fact, like this month, we are kind of taking a little bit of a break because, again, we are all living through a pandemic. Burnouts are real, so we are all kind of taking a little break. But this is different. This is kind of a little bit more relaxed and casual. It's a user group talk. This is the time where we have pizza, sadly, which we cannot have. I try to get pizza on these nights. It doesn't work out every month. But if you are joining in because you're part of a regular from the user group, welcome. And if you are just tuning in on Twitch, welcome on board as well. So with me, I have my good friend Khalid here. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you folks doing? Obviously, you can't answer back, but Sam, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Just
Great.
coming back, actually, back to work after like 10 days off. So like the mountain of stuff that we all need to kind of catch up on. So doing some of that.
I have a productivity tip for you before we get started. You just hit Command A and then delete.
I might have to do that. Yeah, like the work emails are like over 200. Like I'm not going to catch up on that. So
Oh, no.
I might have to take you up on that. How do you say your last name? Khalid Abuhakmeh, if I'm saying that right?
Yep, perfect.
Right, perfect.
It's phonetic. Sometimes I know people see it and they kind of freeze up, but if you just slow down, it's pretty easy to get. So yeah.
And Khalid and me are actually in the same state, Pennsylvania, but we are like 7 hours apart because like you're close to Philly, right?
Yeah, I live in the capital of Pennsylvania, which is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Harrisburg, yeah.
So I know you're in Pittsburgh, right?
Well, 2 hours north of Pittsburgh, right up by the lake. So it's like a big state. Like I'm sure it's like 7 hour drive between us and like Philly and Harrisburg area.
Yeah, like we can hop on the turnpike, but getting up to Erie might take a little bit of effort. So.
Yeah. All right. So let's start. Let's start with the user group stuff. I'm going to do like 2 minutes of housekeeping, if I may. Okay. All right. So welcome, folks. Welcome to the Columbus App Dev user group. We meet right here every month, third Mondays. If you happen to be around the central Ohio, Columbus area, then you likely have come to our user groups. So you can find us more, or you can find more info about us on our website, on Meetup. We used to meet at Improving Ohio offices, but we haven't since like 2020 and the fun times that we're living through. But like I said, at least we are online, right? We meet right here, third Mondays. So yeah, come and hang out whenever your time permits outside of work. These are some of the folks who kind of help us run the user group. They give us the space, which we aren't meeting in an office, but again, swag and digital stuff. So these folks really help us out. Now, we always do a quick roundup of some of the events that are going on around you. Many of them are online. Some of them are starting to be in person. So this is our sister user group. This is the Columbus .NET user group. And it looks like they're doing .NET 6 in Maui, which is actually right in my ballpark. So I'll be tuning in. That's coming up August 26th. So they meet the fourth Thursdays. We are the third Mondays. Some months we happen to be in the same week. But they're coming up next week then. Then looking at conferences that are coming up, regional, some of them may be a little out there, but if you have the appetite or if you feel safe enough to travel, you might want to take up on some of these conferences coming up. Codepalooza, though, this is a conference out of Louisville, Kentucky, and this is all virtual. So if you have not gotten yourself in yet, this is your chance. This is happening, I think, Wednesday to Friday this week. So a lot of speakers, good stuff. 3 days of content coming up. Then we have KCDC, which is Kansas City, which is not in Kansas. It's in Missouri. No, I shouldn't say Kansas City. It is Kansas City, but just not in Kansas, right across the water in Missouri. This is actually in person, and they get a big crowd, a lot of speakers. This is happening in September. In person, I will be there. A lot of folks that you might know from the .NET and JavaScript communities will be there. So we are all, hoping to be safe and put on a good show. Then we have Tech Bash, which happens at a big water park. This is actually closer to you, Khalid, maybe. This is at the Pocono Mountains Kalahari Resort, and that's happening in October, again, in person. A lot of good speakers, so take a look. I think I'm missing out one. There's also All Things Open happening in Raleigh, North Carolina in October, right around that time frame. Then we also partner with the folks who put together Visual Studio Live. This is 1105 Media, and we get a big discount if you are going to any of their conferences. They put on a whole set of events all around the country, but again, they haven't been doing so this year. But they're coming back, hopefully big in November. This will be kind of right after .NET Conference. .NET 6 will be out, so a lot of excitement. Right after that, this is in Orlando, so they're kind of combining 3 or 4 conferences all into one big show. So again, if you're up for it, you get a discount as part of the user group. That's coming up in November 15th to the 19th. All right, so we have a blind spot, which is actually kind of a luxury for us, because we actually have 2 speakers who are lined up for September. I'm trying to confirm with them it's going to be either Angular or Blazor. I don't have that yet, but it'll be something good next month. And this month we have Khalid. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Khalid, but I'm just going to say you're awesome. You are out there in the community writing, inspiring others. So thank you for all that you do. And you're here to talk about blogging, right?
Yeah. So thank you for those kind words. Thank you for having me. Honestly, I'm pretty new to DevRel itself, so I have a bit of imposter syndrome. I don't ever know if I'm actually doing a good job or not. But the outpouring from the community has been really, really important and special to me. So I appreciate all the kindness that people bring my way.
And Khalid, you do a lot of .NET, obviously, with JetBrains. You do a bunch of different technologies. But when we were talking, like, you could have talked tech, but like you said, you could also talk about blogging. And I'm all for this, because sometimes I think as an industry, we forget that how many diverse folks work with us, right? A lot of folks are maybe just starting out, right? And we don't always talk to these folks, and we are kind of raising this barrier to entry. So blogging is something everybody, if you have the time and the investments into yourself, should be doing. So I was all for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because maybe I'll get into it during my talk a little, but just in general, it's like there's so many mediums and outlets for sharing information. Folks might know me from Twitter, or they might come to my blog, but Twitter or being on some of those other platforms. So it's really important from that perspective, right?
So I'm not going to take away any more of your thunder. Let me take this down, and if you're ready, I'm going to pull up your desktop.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, and the stage is yours, sir.
All right, thank you so much. Again, thank you everybody for coming. If you have questions, please direct them to Sam. I've instructed him to interrupt me if there's any questions that people want to ask. So this is very casual, but as you may know, the topic for today is about starting your own personal blog. And some of the information in this talk is really anecdotal and learning, especially after joining developer advocacy. I've kind of learned some things about blogging, things that work, things that don't work. And really, this talk is about sharing that information with you so you can kind of learn from my mistakes and get a jump start. So, Sam did a great job introducing me, but if you were kind of tuned out eating that virtual pizza that he sent out to everybody, I am a dev advocate at JetBrains. I primarily focus on our .NET products, so ReSharper, Rider, dot memory. You know those products. But if you don't, head over to JetBrains. You could check them out, or follow me on Twitter, and I'll be glad to talk to you about them. So. Yeah, and if you don't and haven't read my blog, you can get to my blog at any one of these domains. So abuhakmeh.com is probably the easiest one to type. I also have Khalid for America when we were in that presidential cycle. So if I ever start a political campaign, I have the domain to do it. So I want your vote. I'm just joking. I'm not running. But yeah, I have a blog. You can go to it, and I primarily blog about things in the .NET space and primarily around ASP.NET Core. I consider myself a web developer first, so those are kind of going to tend to be the topics I write about. I would say that I have about 10 years of blogging experience. I've actually gone through multiple iterations of my personal blog. There was a time really, really early in .NET 2 where I was blogging about, still ASP.NET. The blog had a theme of like monster horror movies. Maybe somebody out there has a really good memory. It was called Monsters Got My .NET. And I used to blog there. I enjoyed it, but it kind of like dwindled over time. I tried to reboot my personal blog, and that reboot was a little embarrassing because I was writing about things that were just like the wrong things to blog about, and I'll get into that. But this latest iteration, I think, is my most successful, and hopefully, I'll show you some of the things that make it successful, and you can kind of emulate it or use that information for yourself. So, but a lot of people, we were kind of talking about it at the beginning here. Sam was saying like it's important to blog, but I know a lot of people are probably asking themselves like, why should I blog? And that's really a good question, especially considering where we're at today with technology. There's a lot of companies putting a lot of effort into making their documentation world-class. Being a .NET and ASP.NET Core developer myself, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of competing with the mother of all docs, which is Microsoft documentation. It's really good, but here's some of the reasons I think you should consider starting your own personal blog. So for me, the documentation sometimes, while it's great, is very almost dry and clinical at times. And while that's good for folks who are looking for an answer, even on Stack Overflow, you might find a post that gives you the direct answer. That kind of style doesn't always lend itself to actually teaching people the reasoning behind making a technical choice, right? So I find myself reading other folks' blogs to actually learn the motivation behind, doing something and taking that particular approach. And I think to me, that's really, really compelling beyond the technical documentation or beyond just kind of listing out the methods and what it's intended to do. I think blogs can kind of bring that personal perspective that I think gets lost in some of that. Another important thing, and I think this has been really important for me, but growing and meeting and talking to new people and growing my professional network is really fun and exciting. It's always great to find like-minded people, and especially in the situation we're in right now in a global pandemic where you might feel a little isolated or stuck in a rut. Blogging helps you connect with people passively, right? So you write a blog post and somebody finds it and it solves a problem for them. You've created a human connection in a time where creating a human connection is a little difficult. So growing a network is great. And you never know. It's like it leads to different things, which is my next point. Professional opportunities. For me personally, this has been the most amazing thing. And if you start blogging and you run into this situation, it's kind of awesome to do that. I've had several job interviews through my blogging career where I would come in to interview for a position and only to find out that the person interviewing me or the folks interviewing me spent essentially a day or two reading through my blog posts and really getting a sense of my personality and like my technical capability. So by the time I actually entered the interview process, it almost felt like they had kind of made up their mind as to whether I was capable of doing the job. And then it really became a more casual conversation about what I wanted and whether the company was a good fit. So to me, that's also been an amazing side effect of blogging. Like people will know what you're capable of because you're putting it out there. You're learning in the open. Another opportunity, obviously, people find you, reach out to you. They see that you're potentially an expert on a particular niche topic, and maybe offer you, say, like a contracting position or offer to pay you to do something. So that's always great. As I get older, I just had a birthday in July. I find blogging really a great memory mechanism for myself. Uh, there's been times where folks will tweet my blog posts and say, "Hey, I'm glad you wrote about this," and I read the title of that blog post and I'm kind of shocked at how technical it is, and I wonder, like, oh, I must have been smart at one point. You know, it's like, oh, how did I write this? But then I go read my blog post again, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember doing this. I remember why this is important. So that's kind of a great side effect. A lot of times you'll also realize that as a programmer in your career, you'll find problems that will come up over and over again, but intermittently. And it's nice to kind of leave yourself a lifeline in those situations where you can kind of go back and find that same solution. And funny enough, when you go to Google to look for that, you'll sometimes phrase your questions similar to how you answered that question on your blog post. So more often than not, you'll probably be your top search result, which is which is really, really nice, especially for me. So, and the last one, it's kind of a joke, but you'll become rich and famous. You'll get, a star on the Hollywood sidewalk, and people will just throw money at you. That's actually not true. I have ads on my blog, and it doesn't. I'm not going to quit my day job anytime soon. But it's a nice kind of side, like nice side cash to kind of spend on things that might help you day to day. So, but yeah, those are some basic things as to why you might want to consider blogging.
Yeah. So Khalid, I didn't tell you, like,
Mhm.
I'm going to be your annoying sidekick who just sits around and asks
Yeah, go for it.
frustrating questions. But no, I mean, I don't have anything to ask right away. But I mean, this is so on point
Mhm.
as to the reasons why you're leaving a mark and you're making kind of a name for yourself in a
Mhm.
niche area. Because I think like, for better or worse, like, our tech industry seems to be more rewarding if you are a specialist than a
Mhm.
generalist, and that's kind of where we all begin. Like, you have to be really passionate about, like, one particular thing and kind of dive in, write about it, and then people know you as an expert in that domain, and then maybe you step back and do other bigger things. But, like, start somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, because again, some of my early blogs were, you know, like one of the things is you don't necessarily have to be the expert, right? And it's really, and I'll get into this a little later in the talk, but it's about finding your voice. And it's okay to pick a particular style that you write in. And if you're just getting into blogging and you're just getting into making yourself essentially vulnerable, because blogging is that. Very often I'll write something, and by the way, the easiest way to know how to do something the right way is write a blog post about how you think the right way is, and you'll like get 20 answers as to why you're wrong. So, and that's okay. That's okay. But I've spent like weeks looking for an answer and not finding it, and then I'll blog it, and then people leave the answer. But pick your voice, and it's okay to pick a voice of somebody who's just learning and learning in the open, because I think there's a lot of people in that position, like you said, whether they're a generalist, even specialists that may not specialize in what you're writing about will find value in what you write about. So, yeah.
Yeah, good points. So one of our regulars on the user group, 3D Polyrath, is here, and is missing the last bullet point of how to become rich and famous.
Yeah,
it pays for coffee, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, if I might create a ebook, but you folks will have to send me $100 each, and then I'll tell you how to become rich and famous. I'm just joking. So yeah, but you know, like we just talked about this, but you know, ultimately why you want to blog and the reason, it has to be intrinsic. It has to be something that you want to do. Because it's going to take a little bit of time to see success. And what you think success is will actually change over time. So it's important to set goals, but ultimately what you want to do is be driven intrinsically rather than from some of these external, you know, influences when it comes to blogging. So, just to get into the technical side of things, because I know people are like, well, you're giving me a lot of advice, but how do I actually start a blog? So I actually have a step-by-step guide to start a blog today for free, and it actually takes very little effort to do it. So, and this is a blog that you will own, you'll be able to manage, and you'll actually be able to host yourself for free. So,
Khalid, before you get into that, I did want to address something the chat room is asking, which it might be relevant given, like, again, the times that we are living in. So, Fool Schnabel, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in here. So, particularly in these times where we are doing everything in our virtual worlds, there's a lot of Twitch streamers out there, you and maybe me included. So, yes, I mean, if you, it's a matter of, I think, like how good you are before you start seeing some of the dividends come back to you. Yes, there's Twitch Prime subscriptions, but if you are starting to, let me ask you this: if you are starting today and you want to come in with the mindset of a learner, that here I am, I'm putting myself out there, I'm trying to learn this. How do you advise between starting a blog versus starting streaming?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? So, you know, like talking to developers and being a developer, I claim to be a developer. You know, it's different for different people. It's like, for me personally, Twitch streaming is exciting and fun, but it's also not. It also takes a lot of attention to focus on a video or a Twitch stream and watch it. um, the irony of blogging is, while it helps people, a lot of people don't actually read blog posts, and it actually shows in my metrics. What a lot of people do is they'll come to my blog post, skim it really quick, and then potentially bookmark it for a later date, and then come back and potentially read it when they find it's useful. So to your point, it's like it's really depends on like what kind of audience you want to grow and what kind of value you want to put in. I know I have a lot of respect for Twitch streamers because it takes probably exorbitantly more effort to do a Twitch stream. You have to focus on video, lighting, and all that stuff. So,
Well, I mean, but with blogging, like you're putting in a lot of effort, kind of going through the experience. Like, I want to know your experience as a developer. Like, where did you struggle? And to your point, like developers don't learn in the same ways. Like maybe I learn by watching videos. Maybe you learn by reading blog posts. So again, that's like different audiences that we're trying to reach.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's probably going to come down to it's really personal for you as an individual and a content creator and what you're comfortable with. I'd like to do more video, but I also realize like the amount of effort for me personally, it probably feels like a ton of effort. And also I worry sometimes about its ephemeral nature sometimes, you're beholden to the algorithm, whatever the algorithm is, whether it's on YouTube or Twitch. And even as a blogger, I'm beholden to Google's algorithm, and actually I'll get to it in the talk, but it's a little bit more freeing to have a blogging platform. Whereas like if I started playing Taylor Swift music right now on your Twitch channel, it would be a big no-no, right? You'd get a copyright strike.
It's just a different ball game, and videos are not intrinsically searchable through like all of the text that's in it or what you're trying to do. And when you are live streaming, like again, like I said, like it kind of goes back to like what your comfort levels are, but you're kind of sometimes playing to the audience, like you're letting the chat room kind of drive the conversation or what you're trying to do. You're taking advice. That's a very different ball game from trying to solve like a small problem and putting it out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think like and I'll get into this too. It's like
I'm sure you will.
To me, it's important to solve problems, and I think that's where value in blogging really comes in. So I'll get into it a little later. I don't want to
absolutely. And if you do decide to start blogging, our friends in the chat room are funny. Like your step one should be writing your own blog engine, right?
So please don't. It's very tempting because there's a lot of great .NET and even open source markdown processors. Especially I've been playing a lot with ASP.NET Core's minimal APIs recently. So you could probably try to get away with building something, but as you'll see later in this talk, there is actually a lot you have to consider, and I think it detracts from what your ultimate goal is, which is to actually start writing content, right? So
okay, I'll let you get back to what you were starting up.
Oh yeah, no worries. This is fun. So and I can't see the chat, so if somebody says something funny, please let me know. I'd be interested. So if you want to actually start your first blog, this is kind of the easiest way to do it. You want to use GitHub Pages. I think it's like the easiest like low risk way of starting a blog. It's free. You don't have to worry about hosting. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So in 5 easy steps, you'll have your own blog. So the first step is go to GitHub if you have a GitHub account and you want to create a repository. You can create any repository really, but preferably you want to use your username. So Sam, what's your GitHub username?
It's my full name. That's just hard to pronounce for everybody. It's at Summitip. Yeah, and I use that social everywhere, but
so
choose what works for you.
So perfect. So if Sam, I would say sambasu.github.io, you create a repository with that specific name, because that's kind of that will give you a top level domain at github.io. Whereas if you create a repository that doesn't have your username, it'll actually be / the repository name, which is might not be what you want to actually accomplish. So the second step after you've created the repository, you want to create a _config.yaml file. And in this config YAML file, you're going to pick a remote theme. And I've chosen Jekyll's Minima theme. It's really nice. It's clean, and it just kind of works out of the box. And once you've added this, go ahead and commit it to the repository. I think if you create through the UI, it'll just kind of save automatically. So your next step is create a index.md at the root of your repository. And you want to put this kind of front matter. I have it here on the left, and you just want to select the layout. So you say layout home, and this will actually create your home page. Step 4, you want to create your first blog post. So here, you want to follow the naming convention. So under the post directory, which you'll create, again, if you're creating this through GitHub's UI, all this folder and files will get created for you automatically. And you want to set the date in this ISO format. So year, month, day, and then the title of your blog post. In this case, let's just call it Hello World. And then you'll put this markdown. So folks who aren't familiar with Markdown is this kind of writing syntax that focuses really on the core of your content. It has things for headings, links, bulleted lists, block quotes, some of the simple structural things that you might find on an HTML page. Markdown kind of supports that in this kind of light syntax. So,
Khalid, before we move on, a couple of questions. And you kind of scared me a little bit with YAML, but it didn't look like you had to do too much.
No.
That's good. Foolschnabel has a fun comment that a lot of blog posts have been written on gist or gist, I don't know, .github.com to ensure that nobody ever finds them. So, what's your take? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's tough, but gists are fun to share between team members and teammates, but yeah, it's not very discoverable. As you'll see later in this talk, you'll see like why it's important to do some things to make sure that people actually read your content. Because ultimately, the reason you get into blogging is to help yourself, because you could potentially be a future reader. It's the same reason, you write unit tests or you write clean code, is so that future you doesn't hate past you, right? It's always like this time battle between present you not doing things that are nice for future you, right? So that future you doesn't hate past you. So don't write full blog posts in gist. I think that's I'd probably not recommend that. So
okay, and this way that you're talking about, this is actually real fun. The way you're starting up talking about with GitHub, and so every post that you write is essentially a markdown file, right? So and this is like you're bringing in Jekyll, and we're talking static sites here, right? So why did you choose this approach? Like if you were to starting out right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely show you some of the things that I do, and then you'll see kind of why. But if you folks can just hold on until that, I think you'll be like really like happy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and one last question. 3D Polarath is asking: static sites are free on Azure Server, which what I mean, they launched a new thing, right? The Azure Static Apps, I think. So would it be worth it to write your own thing there?
Yeah, like, I personally host on Netlify. I really like what Netlify does. Azure static apps or static web apps, I think they call them. They work just as nice as Netlify. I know Netlify was kind of first to that static deployment model before. So I haven't really switched over to that. Also, Netlify, you don't have to have like an Azure account and put in your credit card and do that kind of stuff. But For all intents and purposes, they kind of will give you as a developer the same experience. And honestly, most of my work is done locally on my machine, and I push to GitHub repository. So like ultimately where I host stuff is not top of mind. Like I'm not always thinking about having to log in and manage and do that kind of stuff. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So yeah, step 5. Oh, sorry. Did you say something?
No, I said keep moving.
Oh, okay. All right. So step 5 is just go to your repository settings and just make sure that you have GitHub Pages set up. And then, you usually pick the branch that you want, and you can choose the theme. This will actually modify your config YAML that we saw earlier. And you can actually set up a custom domain as well. Yeah. But after that, you basically have your blog up and running, and folks can find it, and you can write really cool blog posts for people. So super easy. You can get started this way, and I think it's really good. I personally use Jekyll. I would recommend it. But you'll see later in this talk of a maybe better way to use Jekyll, and how we can actually use .NET with Jekyll to make things even nicer. And what I'm going to show you later is really what I use every single day. And it's been really, really good for me personally. So, okay, so I showed you how to create a blog technically, but that's kind of the easy part. Folks are joking about creating their own blog engine. You can go down that road. There's a lot of great tools out there. I know community member Dave Glick has Static, which is kind of a static site generator written with .NET. That's kind of a cool tool, but given all the technical stuff, and once you get over it, what's some general advice I can give you as a human being? So the first thing is definitely go out and purchase a custom domain name. They can range anywhere from $8 to $14 a year, depending on your DNS. But you create this custom place where people can find you and seek you out. And with custom domain names, you can also use them for emails and things like that. So for me, getting a custom domain is very, very important. And I urge people to do that, especially if you're trying to look professional. Nothing looks less professional than having a domain name with some other company's name attached to your URL. Like as nice as GitHub is for giving you a hosting site, having .github.io is probably not, good for you or good looking. And considering everybody else who has their domain at .github.io, definitely muddies the water. So buy a custom domain name. I think you'll be happy with that decision. I am. Another thing, we kind of talked about it earlier, but you as a person are unique, right? And I don't mean this in like a corny way. I mean it in the sense that you as a developer are potentially working on problems in a unique context. And while you're unique, other people will run into similar problems. But given your perspective, you can bring a unique outlook on solving a particular problem. And I think that's really important value in blogging. My unique perspective can help put things into perspective for other individuals and help them solve their problems. So this is probably one of the biggest sticking points for people when they start getting into blogging. They kind of get into their own heads and start to think, well, Sam wrote about Maui the other day and he's really good at Maui. And why should I write a blog post about Maui? Because here's someone who potentially is better at this topic than I am. I get those doubts. I've had those doubts myself, but at the same time, you potentially could reach a different audience because you have a different perspective. So Don't ever feel like, even if you're repeating something that's already out there, that you're somehow not as good or it's not as important. I think, to me, that's something you need to get over. I struggle with it too, so I know it's hard sometimes to do that. But remember, you're unique. Something that I've found personally that's been enjoyable, kind of rebooting my third iteration of my blog, is just getting into branding. So I do a lot of these featured cards, which go on social media. I also do a lot of tips, and it's kind of neat to like create a brand or a persona around the content that you're creating. So um, I play around with Photoshop. I have some of these tools. If you're on Mac OS, I use Pixelmator Pro, which is a really cheap option compared to, say, Adobe Photoshop. And you can kind of create these like really nice featured images. Uh, I also have blog posts about generating these style of featured images. And recently at JetBrains, I actually created an ASP.NET Core tool that helps you generate some of these featured images as well. So branding is really important. And it's definitely something you should think about as your blog kind of starts to pick up steam.
So on this point, Khalid, like, do you do all of the work that it comes to branding?
Yeah, I do. I do all the stuff for my blog. So I create all the images, and I use a site called Unsplash to find some of these like
Mhm.
free stock photos, which can kind of help tell a story and pull people in. So yeah.
Yeah, and your branding is very on point. Like when you are scrolling through, like doom scrolling on social media, like what you put out, like your images stick out. Like I
Mhm.
will like say personally, like I pause to look at what you put out because it's so good.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because so I'll say this: whether people love your branding, which a lot of people have said, "Oh, I like the way you're doing it." Some people will also hate your branding. I've had people say, "I hate this retro wave theme. It's kind of corny or whatever," but they still remember you for it. And I think I think that's the funny part about it. So if you create this image or persona or branding, it's memorable whether people love it or hate it, right? So it's still valuable regardless of what people think. But I'd
Do
much prefer
you?
people like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at some point in your talk, like, do you talk about like how to handle like criticism and kind of making people angry at what you're putting out? If so,
Um,
we'll wait.
I don't, because it's like the way you handle criticism is like, for me, it's a personal journey. You have to get to a point where you feel comfortable with what you're putting out. And the fact, if somebody comes to you and criticizes you, if you feel good and comfortable about what you're putting out, um, that criticism doesn't sting, because like it's good to listen to it and to maybe think about it in like the context of your work. But the internet is also full of a lot of haters, and it's okay. Like, uh, all my content, if somebody doesn't like it, it's okay, because there's so much out there. But for the people who do like it, they like it, and it's helpful to them. So
Yeah,
um,
no, no, well said. Like you're not pushing this down anybody's like throat. Like you're putting this out as a service because
mhm.
you are trying to share your experience. And like they say, like if you're not making somebody upset, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Like if they're giving you a hate, maybe like they read, they care, and maybe they have strong, passionate opinions that differ, and that's totally fine
Mhm.
because you are sticking to your opinions. And as long as like you're not bad mouthing somebody else, like we don't need to feel bad about sticking to a position, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about criticism as like, whether it's directed at you personally or whether it's directed at your work or something that you did. For me, it's really like, uh, a good example, and maybe this is a little, it's related, but the stuff that's happening in .NET 6 right now around minimal APIs, there's a lot of like conversation about, is going this minimal way going to help or hurt newcomers to the programming, new to programming in .NET? And I think that discussion has been overwhelmingly pretty good, at least from my perspective. Every once in a while, someone will kind of say some harsh things, but like, just because people have differing opinions about where .NET 6 is going, it doesn't necessarily, I don't see anyone necessarily being like attacking anyone personally for making these decisions. But obviously, there's probably instances of that. But again, like, I think the .NET team has done a really good job of like listening to that criticism and like thinking about it, but not taking it personally, right? And I think everyone should approach that like, try to separate the criticism of like what somebody is saying versus if they're actually personally attacking you. And I think separating those two, you can kind of take criticism a little easier.
Well said.
Yeah. I will also say too, when it comes to criticism, it's like, if you think about blogging and you think about putting out a piece of content as final as that is the way it always has to be, I think you can take criticism a lot harder. But the real mindset that I think has helped me, especially over my time in DevRel, is to know that if somebody says, hey, this paragraph is unclear, or hey, this paragraph, you misspoke about something, it's actually, this is what happens. Don't be afraid to go back and correct your blog post, because that person read your blog post and that was the first time they read it. But then the next person that comes through will read the fixed blog post. And it's okay to fix stuff and make stuff better over time. And I think when you look at your work through that prism, the fact that it's mutable, that you can fix it, criticism isn't as bad, because yeah, you can fix the thing that people don't like if you agree that it's broken, right, or not right. So yeah. So yeah, I think that's I guess that's what I have to say about criticism. So
yeah, that's very on point.
Okay. I'll keep going. So we talked about this earlier, and this is kind of one of the mistakes that I did early on, especially in my like second permutation of my blog. I really wanted to get back into blogging, and I reminisced about how fun it was when I did my first blog. But for my second blog, I didn't feel like I had enough content. So I kind of fell into the trap of like writing personal content, and not like personal, like deep, dark skeletons in my closet content, but personal content in the sense of like, today I woke up and I decided to exercise and I did 10 push-ups, almost like a diary format. And what I started to realize is like, when I was starting my third blog and I was trying to port content that was successful to my new blog, I was reading through some of those old ones and I was like, there's just absolutely no value. There's no value in this nonsense that I wrote. And I can call it nonsense because I was reading it and it was just, I kind of chuckled at how bad they were. Right. So for me, it's important that when you sit down and you take your time, which is really a precious resource, that you think about the value proposition that you're bringing to the table for your readers, because your readers are there for a specific reason, and they're reading your content to either solve a problem or to get some new insight. So keep those other posts, if you find that they're valuable to you, put them in a private diary or something like that, because You're literally your only audience at that point. And those blog posts, no one's going to go to Google and look for, how many push-ups did Sam do in December of 2020? Although I have Googled that, so maybe I'm wrong.
No, this is a great point. Like when you started talking about like what do developers full Schnabel here in the chat room is having fun. Like, and chat room wants to know what exactly are you hiding in your closet? What are your skeletons? Speak for yourself. Like, no, it's just not 10; it's 100 push-ups. But anyways, it's just like a lot of times, like when you are fighting against the docs, right? It is one thing to just regurgitate like whatever is in the docs and just like kind of reword things. That's not adding a whole lot of value. Like if you kind of stumble across a problem and you use the docs to solve something, like that is your perspective. Like you're adding a little bit to it that another developer, another reader might find valuable. So yeah, that's a great point, adding value.
Yeah. So always think about that. If you're sitting down to write something, think about like, what value does this bring to somebody who isn't me? And especially you, when you come back to your blog post and you've kind of forgotten, like what you've written. So sometimes the best way to actually experience your writing is months after you've written it and you need your blog post and you start reading it and you're like, oh, well, I should clarify what I meant here, because like even now I'm confused as to what I was trying to get at. So think about the value constantly. Research is really important when you're trying to think about blogging. Actually, one of my favorite ways, and this is kind of like the secret recipe, I think, for blogging in 2021 and moving forward, is we've gone through so many iterations of .NET specifically, right? .NET 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going 5 and 6, and we have .NET Core, all the .NET cores as well. For me, I try to find content that maybe has gone stale sometimes on the internet, and find that content, read it, and try to determine if you can actually update that content for the present, for the future. And to me, the best way to do that is if you run into a particular problem and you find yourself doing a lot of research, and maybe you found a blog post that was written 4 years ago and it kind of has the solution, but the code doesn't compile anymore, and some of the library namespaces have changed. I think that's a really great opportunity if the author has kind of abandoned their blog, to take that content and like rejuvenate it so that people now will find your blog post and help solve the problem in the present and potentially in the future. So this is, for me, a great technique to just kind of keep things alive, even if the person who ended up writing that blog post no longer manages their blog or hasn't blogged in like 5 to 6 years, right? And by the way, this isn't like suggesting you steal content. This is not what I'm talking about. This is you bringing an answer that hasn't been answered in the current context. Excuse me.
That's a good point. But let me ask you a question then, and chat room also has a question here. So how do you not get into that rut where, let's say 2021, you're super pumped about a certain technology, right? And then things come and go, and maybe it falls off, right? And next year, like year one, you're super excited. You started out and you have like 20 blog posts. Next year, it's down to 1. And you have those like ups and downs. Like, how do you keep your readers engaged when you're having those downs?
So I'll show you folks how to do it, and it's actually surprisingly simple. It doesn't border on being kind of silly when you actually realize how to do it. But I'll leave it as a sneak peek. Maybe it's the next slide. I don't know.
All right. And
But
then one more question here, Khalid. Foolish Neville here is having fun. So, what if, like, you're starting up? Well, what if you have already spent a lot of time doing other stuff, like a lot of developers? Maybe you have answered a lot of questions on Stack Overflow, and that is SEO that you don't want to throw away. But how do you kind of bring that goodness back to maybe you just have like a unified brand of yourself across your blogging engine and any of those like forums or answering services, and then you kind of bring it all together. Maybe you just kind of cite yourself as an answer and write that up as a blog post. Like, what are your suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's funny about Stack Overflow is like, what I feel has happened is sometimes a question is asked again, like 4 or 5 years ago, and the answer was accepted, 3 years ago. But since then, there's the real answer, the answer that is like temporal, that is important in today's context, is actually like the 20th answer, right? On that page. To me, that's a perfect opportunity to like look at what the actual question was trying to ask, update it for the present, and clarify what the real answer is according to today's date. And I think that's a great opportunity to actually like take your own answers and update them and put them in a blog post so that they're searchable beyond Stack Overflow and have a little bit more context and have a little bit more guidance. So I think that's how you can take all your presences in forums and Stack Overflow and GitHub gists and kind of direct them back at a blog. I think it's also important to, if you have a URL on an existing blog that gets a lot of traffic, there are technical techniques where you can redirect to a new and updated blog post, so you don't lose any of that and you don't break the web. But that's really going to depend on your hosting platform. So again, I think for me, forums and Stack Overflow, they're these short form, even Twitter, they're these short form question answer platforms. That's what they're designed to do. But I think where your blog can really succeed beyond these platforms is elaborating on those answers and trying to get the motivation as to why. So, yeah, I think that's how I would approach it if you have other personas in different places. And that's kind of what I do on Twitter as well. So, yeah. Hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of touching upon like so many things that we all think about. So like there are other questions as well, but I'll let you go on a little bit. I know you want to cover a lot of these things, and then we'll come back with some questions.
Yeah, and funny enough, my next slide is just be engaged. So if you're in those communities, whether you're on Twitter, I'm big in Twitter. Dev2 is another community platform. I've been in Reddit. Sometimes Reddit is good, and then sometimes it can be a little pedantic for my taste. Not here to badmouth Reddit. Reddit's fine. And there's other platforms, but for me, ultimately, blogging is about creating those connections, whether they're like asynchronous connections with people. Sometimes you can create synchronous connections where you're having conversations on all these platforms, but it's good to be reachable and it's good to have these conversations with people. So just be engaged with the community that you're trying to help. Yeah, so this is a bit technical. So if you follow me on Twitter, you probably see these posts promoting my content. And one of my ways that I like to be engaged and help people find my content is just to randomly tweet a blog post. Funny enough, a lot of other bloggers in .NET have actually started using at least parts of this code to promote their own blog, which is great. It's awesome. The truth is, it's like I don't have any secrets. If you want to know how I do something, I'm more than happy to answer it. And a lot of my techniques are actually on GitHub. So yeah. So yeah, this is a way that I make sure that people can actually find my content. This is self-promotion, and it literally takes 4 lines of code, which is kind of nice. So people ask, like, how do you not lose motivation, right? And what I found is try to hold yourself to a particular number of blog posts a week. So for me, when I started in DevRel, and it's like my full-time job at 8 hours a day, right? I tried to accomplish at least 2 blog posts a week. Since I've kind of reduced it down to a week because I realized 2 blog posts, the second one was kind of undercutting the momentum of the first one. So I found like 1 blog post a week can get you a lot of good momentum. And here's the secret. The secret is to write on a particular schedule. But the schedule is like a baseline. It's not important that you only write 2 blog posts a week, because the way inspiration will hit you, you might end up writing 4 blog posts a week. You find this really interesting topic and you're solving all these problems on your current project. So you end up writing 5, maybe even 10 blog posts, right? But what you end up doing is you schedule those 5 to 10 blog posts so that they fit into this 1 or 2 blog posts a week schedule. And if you think about it, if you write 52 blog posts in the first week of a year, right? And that's wild. Like, no one's going to do that. But let's say you're hit with this huge inspirational streak and you write 52 blog posts. Well, write those blog posts so that they're, in a sense, timeless. They're not tied to the moment that you wrote them. Does that make sense? Like, one of the things I've tried to avoid in my personal journey, maybe because I'm not great at it, and maybe because I realize it, again, doesn't add a ton of value, but I've decided not to be a thought leader in a sense of like trying to prescribe any particular pattern or architecture style, or prescribe what the .NET community should be doing. To me, those blog posts maybe don't add a ton of value because they immediately deteriorate as soon as the context of our community changes. So again, if you write 52 blog posts, but they're all kind of timeless in a sense, you can slot them in to your schedule, to your publishing schedule. And then that way you don't feel like you have to sit down every single week and produce a new blog post on the spot. So if you get into a rut where you don't feel inspired, you might have a backlog of 30 blog posts that may give you enough buffer time to kind of get your inspiration back. So hopefully that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. Yep. Okay, let me ask you 2 questions here. You mentioned something about like fellow bloggers. Do you ever consider doing specifically something to increase the number of subscribers? Like, do you ever like pay for bots or do anything?
Do I pay for bots? Oh man, no, please don't. I don't. So to me, I have metrics on my blog. I think metrics are important to just see if you're gaining momentum and if you're doing something that is, metrics come and go. I've actually noticed in July, a lot of people have gone on vacation. So my blog traffic has dipped a little just because no one's near a computer. But yeah, like around the beginning of the year and the end of the year, like traffic picks up. But yeah, don't pay for traffic. I don't think it's worth it. I think where it is worth it is to engage with the community. And if you're on social platforms like Twitter and Reddit, in Stack Overflow and you see a common question come up, or if you're trying to solve your own problem and you want to blog about it, I think that's the stuff that'll actually get people coming, because for all intents and purposes, self-promotion is important. But when I look at my actual metrics, 80 to 90% of my actual traffic to my blog happens organically, which means people go to Google searches and type their question, and I'm in the result when they go to look for the answer, right? So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so don't. It's important to promote in those social media channels like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and whatever. But again, like once you put analytics in, you'll realize like it's a nice chunk of traffic, but most of your traffic comes from pleasing the algorithm. So
yeah. And one more question here. Foolish Schnabel was asking, and this is interesting because I've never actually thought about this. Like for each of your blog posts, like the content that goes out, is there a license that you tie to it?
I don't have a particular license. If there's a specific code example and I pushed it to GitHub, I normally license the code under MIT, which is basically don't sue me if you run this in production. But let's be honest, it's like even if I was to find out, say like Microsoft is running my code from my blog post, you literally don't have the resources to take on tech juggernauts, right? Like, so in the sense, it's like it's more important to me that people find these solutions and it helps them kind of overcome hurdles. And like I mentioned earlier, it's about building your network and getting more opportunities. So the code itself isn't that valuable, but your persona and your presence online is probably more valuable than that. So,
yeah, makes sense.
But if you know anyone who's using my code, please let me know so I can sue them. No, I'm just joking. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, I was talking about scheduling. I actually have this tool, and I'll actually show you. You can get started with it, but this tool actually shows me today's date, what my latest blog post is, when my next post date, when my publish date is going to be, how many days away. So when this number is higher, I feel a lot better. It means like, oh, I have some buffer space. And then I also know how many blog posts I've actually blogged. So if you can still see my screen, here, I'll give you the inside scoop. So if you want to steal some of my content, you can. But yeah, here's my actual current blog information. So you can see that my last blog post, the one if I stop blogging, I have 105 days away to get to my next blog post. So I'm already in December of this year with content. So yeah. And yeah, like if I went on vacation for 2 weeks, like I feel okay, right? I have some other stuff in here that I'm tweeting and doing stuff like that, but this is really neat. So okay, and then word of inspiration, don't quit. The thing about blogging that I found is like momentum is really important and consistency is really important. And that's where that schedule really comes in, and that pipeline of content really comes in. Even when you lose energy, if you had energy, a month ago, and if you've given yourself enough momentum, it can kind of help you take a break and come back re-energized and keep your momentum going. So don't feel like you have to do it every week, but just feel like you need to have content for every week. So, and that's going to come and go. So, here's some general advice from about robots. I know we're running. I don't mind staying a little later. I know we might go over a little, but
yeah, let's do another 5-10 minutes. And the only thing is, we do tend to hop offline for a little bit for folks to just kind of hang out off the internet if they wanted to.
Okay.
But yeah, let's give ourselves another 10 minutes. This is good stuff.
Okay. So one of the important things and why I've kind of suggested you use something like Jekyll is like there's a lot of maturity in that ecosystem, and bots. I said like most of your traffic is going to come organically. Bots love semantics, so like headers, titles, clear delineation of code blocks. Sometimes even bolding the answer in your blog post can really help you kind of jump in the rankings. So just using HTML to its fullest to kind of appease your robot overlords, I think is really, really helpful. Like I said, page titles really matter. So think about your page titles, think about the question you're answering, and try to kind of put those in your page in important places. I think it really, really helps. This is something I kind of learned the hard way. Again, from my terrible blogging attempts at telling people about my exercise routine. But sometimes your answers will be short, but try to at least hit 300 words with your blog posts. I think it's kind of important. Maybe not for humans, because I kind of mentioned humans come to your site and they just skim and they're there for 30 seconds. But robots and crawlers care because they're going to use the words in your blog post to actually help people surface your content in a search engine. So what I found is about 300 words at least in a blog post really, really help. And you want to kind of hit that mark. I normally hit around like 1,000 to 2,000 words in a blog post. Sometimes you can go kind of wild and do 3,000 words, but at least 300 words is kind of good place. Excuse me. Performance of your site is really important. Bots will just not crawl like a slow site. So I know folks were talking about building their own blog engine, and some people might reach for that fancy new front end framework. I've seen folks write, I feel bad about saying this, but I've seen some folks write blog engines using Blazor, which right now isn't very optimized. So you're talking about downloading like an 8 megabyte WASM runtime just to have static content show up. And while it's technically cool, you've kind of kneecapped yourself because crawlers are just not gonna hang around long enough to scrape your content and put it in the search results. So yeah, always think about performance, right? And I think to me, that's where static site generators really work out well. Optimized for mobile. Not that a lot of people read content on mobile. I've actually 25% of my readers are on mobile. But Google actually, when they crawl your site, give precedence to the fact that you have optimized for mobile experiences, and you get a bump from that. So, and again, I'm saying all these things because I've measured using analytics. So you can use Google Analytics. It's free and it gives you a lot of information. But there are other analytic tools out there. If you're looking at Netlify or you're looking at hosting in Azure, maybe you want to use something like Application Insights. Netlify has server-side metrics, so that also adds to the how to get started with GitHub Pages with Jekyll. And I personally think static site generators are the best tool when it comes to personal blogging. I will also say like Microsoft Docs is like the world's largest static site generator. So If static site generation works for one of the largest sites on the internet, it's probably going to work fine for most people's personal blogs. So the advantage for me is everything is generated at build time. So the artifacts of my blog are literally just HTML pages. If I wanted to host a site individually or host a blog post individually, I could host that HTML page almost anywhere. So I think to me, that's a little nicer than say like running a Blazor backend with SignalR. Yes, technically it's cool, but you kind of have to deal with all that infrastructure. I can probably imagine someone in chat right now saying, "But Blazor has WASM too." Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
the chat room was talking about Blazor, interestingly, before. Okay, but
Yeah.
if you have time, just pause for just a quick question here, and
Yeah.
this is a really good one. So Dan Spark,
Mhm.
and while we were talking, I think the stream kind of blipped for a second, but it looks like we're back on, and yeah, may have been like Twitch having a moment. But when you think about your audiences, like how do you cater to non-English speaking audiences? Like, do you have any guides for localizing your blog posts?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't cater to non-English speaking. Not that I don't want to, but again, this is kind of like a personal effort, so it probably makes sense to. I will say a lot of static site generators have localization in mind and have support for that, but I guess if I wanted to do that, I would probably reach out to professional translators that have some technical background. I know at JetBrains we have our official JetBrains guides, which are really nice, and we actually worked with community members in Japan to do some Japanese localization, which was really nice. So, but
Some
yeah,
of the automated stuff kind of falls apart. Like it can be tone deaf or just kind of literally fall apart if you're
yeah,
using some of the technical stuff is hard.
yeah. I'm actually trying to learn Japanese, and like
Nice.
the Japanese sentence structure is really, really different than English, and I would not feel I wouldn't feel comfortable just throwing it into Google Translate, because it can be really, really different and strange. So yeah, I wouldn't do that. I'll keep going because I know we're running short on time. But yeah, here are some options that I find like my personal favorites. 11T I really like. Jekyll is my personal favorite just because it's such a mature product. I know it's not as cool as some of the JavaScript or .NET stuff. Hugo is written with Go. These are all great options. This is Gatsby. I'd probably steer away from Gatsby just because of its complexity, but it's an okay solution as well. But I would really recommend Jekyll. It's really mature. It has a great community around it, and it's relatively straightforward. And a lot of the problems have kind of been solved when it comes to static site generators. We kind of saw how Markdown works. Here's a blog post that I've previously written. And yeah, it's all just Markdown, which is really, really nice. That's kind of what I like. I don't spend hours trying to figure out if a word should be bolded or italicized or if I picked the right font. No, I can just kind of focus on writing. And you just kind of run it through the command line. And it has its own server that you can run. I think that's awesome as well. Like you pick a static site generator, you write your content, you build it, and you deploy. It's that easy, right? Well, no. I think the things that I've learned as just kind of a blogger is you just have to think about so many other things, especially if you're trying to create your own brand or your custom theme. There are things like tags, dates. If your blog has multiple authors, Open Graph is really important. If you don't know what Open Graph is, it's kind of what Twitter and Facebook use to look at a page and pull a featured image, or to pull the title of your page and who the author is. So Open Graph is really important for crawlers and social media sites. We talked about the importance of titles. If you're going to end up writing a lot of content, how are you going to page and archive that? Social media, images, blah, all this stuff is like a lot to think about sometimes. So my biggest recommendation is, if you end up going with Jekyll, just buy a professional theme. They're usually around $20 to $50. I know that's maybe a little high for folks who may be thinking about doing blogging kind of on their spare time. But a lot of these professional themes already have all those questions kind of answered for you. And this site specifically, I'm not sponsored by them. I don't get any kickback, but I personally like the Jekyll themes that they put out. So Jekyll Themes IO, they're a really good starting point and have a lot of those answered. So uh, the the pros for static sites: you have full control of your content. You focus on purely writing through Markdown, and ultimately, there's a lot of flexibility in kind of what you can accomplish. Some of the cons of static sites sometimes is they can be fiddly. So if you end up choosing Jekyll and Ruby and Liquid, maybe aren't your thing, because that's the technologies they end up using. You might kind of get lost in the weeds if you want to customize something. And if you get lost, you might lose focus on the fact that you should be writing a blog rather than focusing on the technology. Which, again, if you end up writing your own blog engine, that's that's definitely a consequence of like going down that road, and you end up losing like perspective on the goal that you set out to accomplish, which is to write content. And finally, this last one, it's a small con. I don't think it probably affects a lot of people, because static sites are pretty good these days. But over time, if you have a lot of content, your build time will go up, and you might not want that, right? So, but that's a nitpick for me. I don't think that's a big deal. Even with my blog, it takes maybe 10 seconds to build my entire blog. So one of the big advantages of static sites, especially if you host in Netlify or Azure Static Web Apps, you can cache this stuff in a CDN, and it actually will be really close to your readers. So I have a lot of readers in India, in the UK, in Japan. So Netlify actually pushes my content to edge networks. So those folks have the same experience that folks in the United States have with my content and my blog. It's cheap/free. So Netlify, Azure Static Web Apps, I think you can actually end up hosting everything there for free. And yeah, Markdown. I just love Markdown. So in summary, I would just say engage with your community. Think about the crawlers, the bots. Really take ownership of your blog. I know there's a lot of platforms out there that you might be tempted to blog on, but I think static site generators for me are the right approach. And then just do it. So I actually ended up publishing a starter template for the way that I blog, and it's called Frankenblog. And what you actually saw here, this info is actually part of this Frankenblog approach. So if you actually go to this blog here, you can fork this, and you'll have a starting point for a Jekyll static site. And you'll actually have these .NET commands as well that you can use. One of them is DNR is actually shorthand for .NET Run. So .NET Run info, and that's kind of what does this. But I also talked about writing on a schedule. So I'll show you some of the C# code and then we can kind of wrap up. But if you want to write a new thing, so you just say .NET run new, and you say, I'm talking to Sam about ASP.NET. And this is kind of a technique that's really been helpful for me as a writer. You can see the date for this is on Monday. But let's say I create a new, I'm talking to Sam about Maui. You'll notice that the date is now Tuesday, so it's skipped one day. But the way that I like to write on a schedule is to release content on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The reason the logic picked Monday is because I don't have any content. But let's say I want to talk to Sam about minimal APIs. You'll see the next blog post actually scheduled itself for Thursday. Now, let's talk to Sam. What's something new that's happening in .NET? I don't know. Xamarin Revival. I don't know. Xamarin comes back with a vengeance or something. You can see now that we skipped to next Tuesday as well. And I think this is really powerful. Like I said, if you are hit with a bunch of inspiration, you don't have to worry about managing dates anymore. You just come in here, you type a command line, and you actually have this backlog of content now being created for you. So let's say now you can say DNR info, and you'll be able to see, oh, now I have 5 blog posts and they're 7 days away. Here's my latest one. Here's my nearest one. And here's basically my latest blog posts. So yeah, if you're thinking about getting into blogging, check out Frankenblog because it just kind of encapsulates a lot of what I've been doing, especially with like writing and stuff like that. So again, that's basically wrapping up here. But if you want to reach out to me, feel free to follow me on Twitter. And yeah, go to my blog. I need those hits. The bots, the bots. I got to stop buying the bots, Sam. No, I'm just joking. But
yeah, this is awesome. This is so awesome.
So yeah, that's generally it. Yeah, I appreciate everybody staying. I know we went over a little bit, but no, I appreciate the conversation. I kind of wish I could have seen some of the chat because
yeah, I mean, well, we highlighted it and then we'll push it out to YouTube so that way you can also see the comments if you're watching this later on. But let me ask you one quick question. Like I hear all of the power that you get by picking a static site generator and having all that customizability at your disposal. But if somebody is just starting out and they want to just run with, what any of the CMSs like, WordPress or, Drupal or any of those things, like, do you actively discourage people from doing that when they're starting out blogging?
So I guess the community that I'm talking to are developers. I assume they have some technical capability. Like running some basic commands or like writing some C# code. It's not that I discourage WordPress. It's just I've personally had to kind of manage WordPress. Actually, JetBrains, we use WordPress as well. There's this new editor called Gutenberg. Some people love it. My colleague doesn't. So there's a lot of quirks even with those kind of hosted platforms. But I will say, like, I would discourage WordPress because some people might. There's a couple issues with WordPress for me, at least for someone who just wants to focus on writing. It's a platform you have to manage. There's a database, there's a backend. You have to continually update WordPress. WordPress is probably the largest attack vector on the internet. I'm sure people have probably seen how often WordPress blogs get kind of hacked. And it's not WordPress's fault. Like, they're good at what they do, but when everybody uses WordPress, it's kind of like a good target, right? Especially when people don't update for those security vulnerabilities. So for me, I don't recommend a WordPress because it falls into that problem again where you're managing this thing, and instead of it being something that motivates you to write more content, it becomes a burden, and that burden can maybe like extinguish that momentum, that fire to write. So
yeah, no, well said. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, choose your tools, but like you said, like, keep the goal in mind. Like, you want to write, you want to put content out, and clear the roadblocks that kind of get in the way of you doing that.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, people, speaking to developers, you will be tempted to write your own blog engine, but it is very difficult to make a good blog engine. And please don't take that as a challenge, because it's not it's not a challenge, it's a warning, because like I mentioned, all the things that go into bots crawling your content, those have been mostly solved problems. And I think if you go into it, you'll learn a lot, but I think it'll ultimately hurt your chances of actually continuing to write content and to blog. So yeah, I would not recommend you write your own blog engine.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, this has been a great discussion. I'm so glad you took the time to do this, and honestly, kudos to what you have done to your blog and your branding. It shows in the kind of appreciation that you get from the community. So thank you for sharing your expertise, your thoughts, and chat room, Full Schnabel, Dan Spark. I'm forgetting names here. 3D Polyrad. Thanks for hanging out with us, everyone. We appreciate your time. Okay, that is about it for the stream. I know, well, we ran a little over, so I'm not sure if folks are still waiting for us. But if you are a part of the user group and you came in like from Meetup, there is a Teams link in there. So if you want to hop on there, we can spend a couple of minutes offline. But otherwise, that's a wrap for this user group meetup. And we'll be here right here next third Monday next month. And see you all in there. Khalid, thank you once again so much for spending this time.
Yeah, thank you, folks. It was really fun.
All right, so that's it from us, and we'll see you on the next stream. Yeah, take care and bye-bye.